We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and support the recognition of traditional Aboriginal law across the nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging on this land. Hello, I am Jenna Chanel Hayes and this is The Loving Podcast. As you all know by now, I have created this podcast series in order to share the voices and stories of inspiring people who I believe have been put here in this time and place to help heal our world. One thing that came to my attention last year while moving through Africa was the rise of commercial orphanages and the damage that they're doing to communities over there. So in today's episode, we are going to discuss volunteerism and the impact of our Western do-gooder belief system. Today's guest is very well versed in this area. For her age, she has accomplished so much. She is the author of the best-selling book, How Not to Start an Orphanage, and she is also the founder of the Cambodian Children's Trust, which operates projects to break the cycle of poverty in Cambodia. Welcome to the exceptional Tara Winkler.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. Okay, so I guess let's go back to the beginning of this incredible journey of yours. So you went to Cambodia on a trip as a 19-year-old, and that was over 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot has happened on your journey since then.
So much.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that trip and how it changed the direction of your life?
Yeah. I'd left school, I was working in the film industry and was sort of a bit disillusioned. It wasn't as fulfilling as I'd imagined it would be. And so when I was 19, I decided to sort of take that gap trip that I didn't take after school. So went on a trip with Intrepid Travel through Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and the last stop was Cambodia. And Intrepid are a really great ethical travel company. But at that time, 2005, part of that trip was visiting an orphanage. And, you know, the kids performed and did a dance. It was, you know, all very cute and things. But that was my introduction to Cambodia. And then when the trip ended, I decided to stay on a bit in Cambodia. And I think like a lot of Westerners, when you're on holiday in a developing country, I just felt uncomfortable, you know, sipping cocktails by the pool while there's people living in the most incredible hardship, like right outside the hotel gates. And so I wanted to do something more to give back while I was there. So my tuk-tuk driver suggested that I go to the market, buy some secondhand clothes and books and toys and stuff, and we could go and hand them out at the orphanages. So that's what we did. We went and bought all the stuff, filled a few garbage bags full, and then I went to the orphanages and like handed it all out like I was, you know, Oprah Winfrey, one toy for you and you get a toy and you get a toy. And I mean, that experience, there was something that felt sort of not right about it. Yeah. But I kind of put it down to the fact that it had been a sort of self-gratifying exercise and that it was really clear that the kids needed so much more than just a few pens and books and toys. Particularly one orphanage that I visited was just desperately poor. And like I was quite a well-traveled kid. My parents took us to developing countries growing up and things, but I had never seen poverty like I saw in that orphanage. Like the kids were sleeping like sardines on the floor. There was no medical treatment for kids with quite serious medical conditions, with kids that are HIV positive. Me being a privileged girl from eastern suburb Sydney at 19, I don't think I'd even met someone with HIV before, let alone a child who didn't have access to medical treatment.
Yeah.
And there were any scraps of the monastery down the road, drinking dirty water. I was really overwhelmed. They asked me to stay and volunteer, but I didn't know what I could do or contribute and promised that I would raise money and help. So I went back to Australia. Some friends and I got together and we held an art auction in Sydney, and that raised like more money than we initially anticipated, so about $20,000. And I didn't want to kind of send the money back over not knowing if it would get to the kids. So I took the money back over the following year in 2006 and spent a couple of months volunteering at the orphanage. We got all the kids to the dentist for the first time in their lives and vaccinated, and we got a nurse in to take care of all the medical issues. And I was sort of teaching English and got to know the kids quite well over the course of those few months. And then I was back in Australia, still working in the film industry and things. But over the course of the next few months, started getting some news that there was some problems going on in the orphanage. And I was still raising money and sending money over and things. And
who was telling you that?
Some of the staff and also the kids. I'd left with a phone and their English wasn't very good at that time, but it was all very cryptic and I sort of thought it was just management issues. So flew back over thinking that was something that we could just resolve and whatever, but arrived And really was shocked to find out what was going on behind closed doors. So the staff who I had worked with had found out about the gross corruption, abuse and neglect that was happening in the orphanage, and they'd all resigned.
Are they all local?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they'd resigned, and I was hearing these stories, but I didn't know these people very well, and I couldn't speak the language, and I sort of didn't know who to trust and whether, it was just one side of the story that I was hearing or whatever. But then when I heard from the kids themselves just how desperate they were to leave that orphanage, just how terrified they were of the director, that, in my absence and whenever the donors left, everything that was donated would be taken off the kids, sold back to the market. Even, goods or rice or clothes and things would all be taken away and sold. The kids were also subject to gross neglect, like forced to catch mice and things to feed themselves, and there was physical and sexual abuse happening in the orphanage. So when the kids told me how terrified they were and begged me to help get them out, I just felt like I couldn't turn my back on kids that I come to know and just go back to my life in Australia and sort of forget about it. So we did reach out to other NGOs and other organisations to ask for help. And I was sort of quite surprised at that time that everyone wasn't sort of more shocked and horrified about what was going on. And an institution that was supposed to be dedicated to the care and well-being of these kids was abusing them, and nobody sort of was jumping up and down about it. Because I didn't realise at that time that it wasn't just this one orphanage, that this is an endemic happening across the whole country.
Yeah.
But we couldn't get any other help, so we got help from the authorities to set up a new organisation, a new orphanage, and permission from the Social Affairs Department to give the kids a chance to leave if they wanted to. So
how long did it take you to set that up?
It was honestly a matter of sort of weeks at that point, because everything was expedited so that we could get these kids out. So within a matter of weeks, we'd registered an organisation in Cambodia and got permission from the authorities. And then August 2007, on the 17th, we turned up with a bus and 14 kids came and jumped on the bus, and we took them to the new home.
How many were there?
There was 24 in total.
Okay.
10 of them were the nieces and nephews of the director, so we couldn't get custody of those kids, which was really heartbreaking because we know that some of those kids were being sexually abused as well. It's cut to the end of the story. It's taken us over 10 years to get that place closed down.
Wow.
But it is finally closed now, thankfully. But so I was 21 and suddenly responsible for 14 children, which was, not at all my life plan.
And so now you have 14 children in your care. What did you do next?
The staff who had been working with these kids for years before were really hoping that by, having the kids in a safe home, in a therapeutic environment, we were trying to run as many sort of therapeutic programs as we could, that a lot of the behavioural issues that they were seeing in the orphanage around emotional regulation, attachment disorders, hoarding, and just lots of different sort of behavioural issues would resolve naturally with the kids being safe and well cared for and things. And that didn't happen. And we were really struggling with the behavioural things. We sort of felt out of our depth. And so we reached out for help and more training. So we had a child behavioural therapist come over and provide us training, and that's when we learnt for the first time about attachment theory, which is basically the premise that underpins sort of all modern day psychology, that, the most important thing that we need to grow up to be healthy and well and functioning adults is a secure attachment with at least one adult in our lives.
Yeah.
But that hopefully extends out to, a community of adults who are concerned about our healthy development.
Yeah.
The thing is as well, like, if you look at the science of attachment, back in sort of 1950s, there's like Harry Harlow, who was running experiments, not very humane experiments, but on rhesus monkeys, where he would take rhesus monkeys away from their parents and provide them with surrogate mothers. And one surrogate mother would have sustenance, so milk and things, and the other surrogate had all the warmth and comfort and love. And in every instance, the monkey always chose the love over the sustenance. Prior to that, we in the West believed that all children needed to grow up well was a roof over their head and food in their mouth, and it really didn't matter who provided that. So it was some of these experiments and research that really turned that on its head and was the sort of the birth of attachment theory. And so I guess what we came to learn was that no matter how good our orphanage was and how therapeutic the environment, it was still never going to provide those kids what they actually needed, which was to be in secure and safe and loving families.
Yeah.
And so while all that was happening, I also was learning to speak Khmer. So I was sort of fluent by this stage and could communicate properly with the kids.
How long was that process?
About 6 months.
Okay.
And when I could talk properly with them, I also then discovered that they weren't actually orphans at all, that they all had families, and which was a really big shock, like especially considering the fact that I'd sort of uprooted my whole life for kids who I thought had nobody in the world to care for them, and to find out they all had mums and dads or alive, and there was a couple that were orphans, but even they had brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles. So that was a real shock to sort of learn that these kids weren't orphans. But I think also, if I'm being really honest, at that time, I think when you hear that parents have given their children up to an orphanage, the sort of unconscious judgment is like, what kind of parents would give their children up to an orphanage? Like people that are not very good parents or perhaps don't deserve their children, you know? But then, because everything we'd learnt about attachment theory and knowing that this orphanage model was never going to provide these kids what they actually needed, we went and met the parents, and it was just obvious that all of those judgments were so false, that these parents love their children as much as any parent in the world. And they had entrusted their children into this orphanage in the hope that it would be a path out of poverty to a better life, unaware of all the harm, exploitation and abuse that happens inside orphanages. So with all of that information, also around that time, a report had been released by the Cambodian government and UNICEF, which basically found that over the course of a 5-year period, so 2005 to 2010, which is pretty much the time that I'd been in Cambodia, the number of orphanages had skyrocketed, had increased by more than 75%. And the number of children living in those orphanages had more than doubled. And over 80% of those kids weren't actually orphans. So with all of that information, it became really clear that we needed to change the model and not only reintegrate these kids back home. And, you know, there's hundreds of orphanages in Cambodia. So it wasn't just these kids, but all of the other kids in the orphanages also needed to be reunited with their families. But also we needed to build a model that was focused on prevention and addressing the root causes, strengthening communities, strengthening families to prevent children from ever being separated from their families in the first place. So that was sort of the beginning of the journey of the work that we do today.
Which is such a massive mountain to climb.
Yeah, it is. I mean, then, you know, there was all sorts of other sort of obstacles in that along the way. So 2010, I did an Australian story, which was sort of focused on the young Australian girl rescues children and sets up an orphanage. And in that story, just inadvertently inspired so many people to donate to orphanages, set up their own orphanages. It aired on TV about 12 times. It was a hugely successful program. I won awards and all these accolades and really became the poster child for setting up an orphanage, which then I had realized is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And, you know, it is the Western donations that are flooding into these orphanages that is causing a stolen generation of children. So it has also been a huge mission and journey to kind of get the message out there that that was a mistake and that there is a much better way.
Are people open to hearing you say that was a mistake?
I mean, the thing is, I've always been a believer of, you know, you sink or swim based on doing the right thing. Even if it was going to blow back on me in a really negative way, it was the right thing to do. And so I had to do it. But initially when we sort of came out and said, we're not an orphanage and orphanages are harmful, I was worried that we would lose all our support and it would all go away. But I mean, our supporters have been incredible. Most of our donors have been supporting us since the beginning. They've come on the journey with us. And I think that...
And with you.
Yeah. I think that when you're not defensive yourself and you can put up your hand and say, you know, I was wrong and I made a mistake, and when you know better, you got to do better. I think it sort of disarms people and they look at things in a different way.
You are the vehicle for everybody else learning. You know, it's a lot of work. It's
I've
a lot of
had to learn the mistakes the difficult way.
Yeah. But it's a lot of work, I think, for humanity to learn, to unlearn.
Unlearn.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's so. If I'm being honest as well, since, you know, so I've written a book about this now, I've done a TED Talk about it, and really since then, and I've always been aware, that it is literally, it's just the donations that flood into orphanages in Cambodia and countries around the world that is causing this boom in the number of orphanages and children to be separated from their families. And the Parliamentary Inquiry into Modern Slavery in 2017, Sinette, who is one of my best friends, but she was one of the older girls that we helped escape the orphanage in 2007. She and I testified at the inquiry to put forward the case that the movement of children from families into orphanages for the purposes of exploitation is a form of trafficking and therefore a form of modern day slavery. And, so that bill passed in 2018. So we've had a lot of success, but I think it's really only been in recent times. And I think a lot of the conversation that's been happening around Black Lives Matter and things that I've become aware of, the fact that really the root cause of this issue and this driver of removing Black and brown children from their families is rooted in racism. And I mean, if you look at even the history of orphanages in Australia, the UK, the US and Canada, all of the kids in those orphanages in 1800s and things, they actually weren't orphans either. They were all kids from poor families. And it was this sort of thinking that poverty and immorality are one in the same, and that, Black and brown communities are inherently dangerous places and that their parents are inherently immoral and corrupt.
Yeah.
And by removing children from those corrupting influences early enough, we can save them.
Yeah.
And so it's that driver to save the children and colonize these countries that is, I still think, if we're being really honest, at the root cause, the drivers of why we're still removing children from families in the developing world as well.
100%.
Yeah. Which, that's been a really difficult sort of pill to swallow, I suppose.
Are there a lot of international people running orphanages in Cambodia other than...
Yeah, most. And I think that the thing to mention as well is that 100% of the orphanages in Cambodia are foreign funded, which is also what makes it really difficult for governments to regulate. So the Cambodian government and most governments around the world are mandated to deinstitutionalise and close their orphanages and reunite the children. But because these orphanages are privately funded and it's really difficult to track and to control the money from each individual donor who's sponsoring a child in whatever country in the world, it's a really difficult thing to stem the flow of those funds.
Yeah.
And so lots of it, we don't even know how many children there are in orphanages around the world. They're uncountable because so many orphanages are unregistered.
Yeah.
We know that there's sort of upwards of 8 million, and that's a really old figure. So we actually have no way to actually count them or have any idea of how many orphanages there are and how many children, because of how unregulated it is with private donors and privately run institutions. And that all obviously comes from this well-meaning place of people thinking that they trust, whoever's running the orphanage and that they've got the best interests of the children at heart. And I think that on the surface, everyone wants the best for children, and it would be horrified to know that their money is in any way harming a child. I do also think simultaneously at the core of those beliefs, we've been socialised to believe that Black and brown children are better off being raised by not their parents. I'm the most passionate anti-racist, but still I think, if I rewind, I'm really honest and sort of look at what, I was doing, my motivations. I do think I had this sort of unconscious judgment on the parents, which is completely unfounded and untrue and rooted in racism,
And just learned, and you've done the work to unlearn.
Yeah, it's like privilege, it's the water that we swim in, and it's invisible to us, until you really start pulling apart the matrix and seeing it for what it is. Yeah.
So have some other orphanage owners over there, have they learned from your mistakes, and are they doing are they helping to break down the system?
Some are willing and have been willing to sort of make that transition. And that's where I guess when we had those 14 children was we found all their siblings. So at one point there was sort of about 40 children in the orphanage, so we'd brought all the siblings before we closed and reunited them all with their families. And if we can, from being an orphanage, completely transition to family-based care and community-based care and the empowerment of whole communities to support families, then it's possible for every orphanage to do the same thing. So there have been some that have been receptive to that, and then there are others that are completely digging their heels in and have no intention to change.
Because they don't believe, or do you think because they have other...
So there are, a number of people, Australians as well, running orphanages overseas. And I think that while it's true that people in that line of work aren't paid very much money, there is absolutely a reputational benefit. The fact that as a society we applaud the white saviour, we view people who are doing that sort of work as unquestionably altruistic, they're heroes in our society, and we view them as morally superior to other white people. And so therefore we never question the work. All of the media that happens around NGO and charity work is always looking at the founder, like the charismatic person up the front with an interesting story, and myself included. Like, instead of looking at the actual work, what work is being done, what impact is being had, it sort of surprises me, like, people are parting with their hard-earned money. Like, you've worked hard to make those dollars and you're giving it away. Like, you've got to do the research, and it's more than just like hearing my story or hearing someone else's story and thinking that's a great thing and so sending some money over blindly. Like, you've got to do the research. Like, what's the work that's happening? What's the impact that's being made? And is it aligned with your values? Is it aligned with best practice? Before you kind of, just willy-nilly sort of sending money over. I think this orphanage crisis is a really good example of the fact that where we send our money absolutely has an impact. Like, this is a Western-created problem where our dollars have created a whole industry of orphanages that are exploiting children. We have an impact, and we need to be very careful with what impact we make, whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah, and this is not just Cambodia, this is global.
Yeah. The orphanage crisis is literally happening in every developing country across the globe where there's tourism.
Yeah. I reached out to you last year when I was in Uganda because I was in this beautiful town that was just tourism was just starting to kind of make its mark, I guess, which is not the most positive mark. And I think I saw 3 orphanages within like 100, 200 metres. And the only reason I saw them was because somebody approached me and wanted to show me this little tiny square building. And when he brought me down, I looked inside. It was filled with these beautiful children looking up at me. They were exhausted, they were tired up, but they were just sitting at that desk. Purely for the purpose of a tourist coming along, seeing that. And I was like, you want to help, you want to do something. When you see these beautiful people, sitting like that, you want to do something.
Yeah. It's a very effective fundraising model.
It's so effective.
And Sinette, she speaks publicly about this a lot and shares her story of what it felt like to have to perform for, and to be part, like, it's a whole orchestrated, very carefully orchestrated machine, and it's very effective. Like,
and they had a little book, and every tourist, every Westerner wrote their name in and signed and put their phone number and their email. So the guy who was starting it, and this was a young guy, like in his 20s, and these kids didn't have, like, it was not a wonderful sight. Meanwhile, he's riding this brand new, amazing looking motorbike, and so I think for a tourist or somebody going into that situation, you really, you just have to look at the whole situation.
Yeah.
And I actually, after that, I went online that night and I started researching commercialised orphanages.
Yeah. All we have to do is, like, put yourself in their shoes. So imagine if we had busloads of tourists coming into Australia and being able to play and interact and engage intimately in schools and daycare centres and our foster care homes or whatever with Australian children. The thought is horrifying. We would never allow it. Like, child protection standards, like, never allow that. But yet that's how we behave when we're overseas, and it's all sort of volunteerism activities. You really have to think, like, if it's not okay to do at home, it's really also not okay to do when you're overseas in a developing country, just because you are white and you have the power and the privilege to behave in ways that you wouldn't and couldn't.
Which is subconscious, like, until you recognise it.
Yeah.
Like most people, I mean, things are changing slowly, but most people don't recognise their position of privilege and power. They're just, everything's easy.
Yeah.
We don't have to look at...
Yeah, we've never had to look at it or question it.
Well done.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I mean, and we're still on that journey. Sinette and I are working now on adapting my book into a feature film, which is exciting. We're both now contracted on to write the script, which is
amazing.
Yeah, we're in the process of doing now.
So what were you doing in film before your life changed?
I was doing like set dressing and props buying. I wanted to do computer-aided design and stuff. So that's obviously, a lifetime ago now. But kind of interesting to kind of be going full circle in a sense.
Yeah.
Never imagined that I'm the most inexperienced scriptwriter of all time. But I'm having a lot of fun doing it. So with Sinette, who I mentioned a couple of times, she is actually scriptwriter in Cambodia. So she writes, screenplays and things for Cambodian TV series and whatever. So
you took her out of that orphanage. She was one of the 14 children. How did she learn these skills?
It was difficult for Sinette because she was one of the prime victims of the sexual abuse. And I say that if you look at any of Sinette's interviews, she's speaking very publicly about all of this herself. I feel uncomfortable speaking on her behalf, but she's not here. So, she ended up trying to prosecute the director for rape, and that ended up being unsuccessful, just became sort of too dangerous and not enough evidence and things. So she ended up then going to finish, we supported her to finish school in Phnom Penh. So she was sort of away from Battambang, the city, and the orphanage and things. And so she finished high school down there. And then just the kind of incredibly intelligent, amazing human being that she is, she's left school, dyed her hair bright red and went and got a job at the BBC as a radio producer. And so she did that for a while and then moved into script writing and film. So,
and that's her thing? She's like...
Yeah, well, in the pandemic at the moment, everything's sort of been shut down and stuff. Yeah. So she's actually working at CCT with us at the moment, doing some comms, so that some of the videos of the work that we're doing are sort of hosted by her at the moment.
So you closed down the orphanage, and how did you find the children's families?
Family tracing in Cambodia is not so difficult. I think it's different in lots of countries around the world. I know colleagues who work in Nepal, family tracing is quite a difficult thing, it's like the film Lion. It's trying to, they go on long treks for days and miles to find these families. And, when they do, the families think their children are, long gone. Yeah, these incredible emotional reunions and things. In Cambodia, a lot of the kids will know where their homes are, and community in Cambodia is so strong. The whole country revolves around families. And I mean, that's part of the tragedy of all this is historically the way that Cambodia always dealt with their orphaned and vulnerable children was in kinship care with the sort of concept of the village raises the child. So family life is central in Cambodia. So everybody knows everyone. And so finding kids' families usually doesn't take too long in Cambodia. But the process of reintegrating them is a really challenging process. And that's why we're so focused on prevention. And our model today is focused on whole community strengthening so that we prevent children from ever being separated in the first place. Because once a child has been separated from their family, that separation is experienced as a type of trauma. Yeah. And, the toxic stress that those kids live with through that separation, early childhood trauma doesn't set children up well for, outcomes later in life. So reintegrate has to be done carefully, slowly. There has to be lots of support built around the families, and it's just always difficult. I mean, we've had some incredible stories, but it's not the right way about it. We want to prevent children, even in really difficult situations where there's challenging problems within the family, through sort of mobilizing the community around that family and building support networks around those families where there's lots of adults who are concerned for the welfare of those children. We can really make sure that children are safe and well cared for and receiving everything that they need without resorting to removing them from their families. Yeah. And another big part of it as well is bringing services into communities, because the primary reason that children end up in orphanages is the parents want them to access services like education and nutrition and healthcare. So by bringing services into communities rather than the children out of the communities to access the services, we can keep communities together so that they've got all of the vital services that they need to keep families together. Yeah.
So you guys closed down the orphanage and managed to put all the children back with their families. Was that challenging not only for the child but also for the families, for the parents? And
yeah, a lot of the work that happens is around helping both the children and the family to create a narrative so that they understand why this all happened and things that, it's really difficult. But the social workers in Cambodia are, top-notch. We have a team of over 150, all Cambodians. We no foreigners on the team. And
Amazing.
the social work that's happening over there is like some of the best social work you'll see in the world. It's really impressive. But the model today we call the Village Hive because it really is a whole community response. And the way that sort of works is it's a preventative model. So we're focused on keeping children with families and within their communities. One of the key principles of the model is co-creation. So every step along the way, we co-create with the whole community. So we're not going in there sort of telling communities what they need and how they should raise their children. We do the whole process. So the people whose lives are affected by these programs are the people who are the architects of the programs and have seats at the decision-making table. Like our board of directors are all ex-care leavers and ex-beneficiaries who have authority at the sort of highest level of decision making. So like when we're working with a community, we partner with also the local council, all the authorities and the community the first step is to sort of establish a community child protection network. And some communities choose to do that through a sort of election process. Some choose to like self-nominate and however they choose to do it, we form this child protection network made up of community members. And then those community members receive some training in child protection and things like that. And then they really design their own child protection system for their community. So looking at risk factors in their communities, the process of how they want to identify families, and it's the role of that network to ensure that there's not a single vulnerable child or family that's overlooked. And a big part of then what happens when a family or a child's referred in, we have village-based social workers as well who are members of that community who have been trained up in social work so they know their communities really well. The way that we work with families is also in this really non-paternalistic way, believing that families are the experts in their own lives and that the solutions to these problems, like complex social problems, exist within local communities. So the social workers use an approach called appreciative inquiry, which is leading through questioning and help families to kind of think through their problems and come up with their own plans, their own solutions. And a big part of that is, this is not just Cambodia, this is globally, of families that are struggling is often sort of social isolation and disconnection. So a big part of the model is around sort of mobilising networks around these families. So that might be other relatives, it might be neighbours, community members, anyone who is naturally connected to the child and concerned about the child's welfare and well-being. And so the family network come together and they help devise a plan to help the family kind of get back up on their feet. And that might be through access to services like our family finance program, which is different to kind of microfinance in that it's really looking at sort of mindset change and changing the sort of scarcity mindset and helping families with like financial coaching, basically planning, monitoring, tracking of their finances and expenses. And then the other sort of element of it is income generation. So helping families to look at how they can then generate more income. And that financial literacy and financial coaching helps families really achieve like financial freedom and, it means that they don't require support ongoing and into the future and things. So.
I mean, it's just self-determination. It's the same thing all over the world. Aboriginal Australia, communities in Africa, and, we all, let's go save the world. And I want to lift up humanity. But not with the ideas that I have, because who says that they're right?
That's right.
They're right for me.
And what makes sense to you is not, and that's when we're looking at like sustainability, and of course we want international charities and programs to be sustainable. But the only way that programs can ever be sustainable is if they make sense to local people. And the only way that they'll ever make sense to local people is if they are the architects of the programs and have seats at the decision-making table.
And they're embedded in their own culture. I think that's so important for any people who want to donate. Make sure wherever you're going to donate, it's, CCT, all Cambodian, you have completely Cambodian people running their own lives, directing the change of where they want to take it.
And again, the sort of belief that foreigners are even sort of needed over there is also honestly rooted in racism. It's the sort of belief that there's sort of incompetence over there, and that in the international development sector, you know, they're the bosses of their local counterparts. They're often paid anywhere between 2 and 10 times as much as their local counterparts. Meetings are often held in English, which place local people at a disadvantage in their own country.
Yeah.
And, you know, a few years ago, we also had all of the senior leadership positions were all white people.
Right.
It was so ineffective because they don't speak the language, they don't understand the culture, everything has to happen through translation, so much gets lost in translation. And as soon as we removed all of that and put Cambodians into the roles of senior leadership, the progress that we've made is astonishing. But thank goodness we had already done that, because if we had had 14, 15 foreigners over there that were managing the whole thing and this pandemic had happened, we would have been really screwed. So, they are doing a wonderful job, and it is evidence of the fact that all of the wisdom and expertise that's required to do this sort of work exists over there, and we don't need to fly white people in on exorbitant salaries to do it.
And again, be another line of dependence.
Maybe this pandemic sort of helps us kind of move forward in some of those directions that enforces that somewhat, which is maybe some of the silver linings.
Yeah, I hope so.
There's lots of rethinking, I think, that this pandemic has sort of brought to the surface.
Yeah.
And really, again, it's rooted in this sort of belief that we're required because they're not competent enough.
Yeah.
Like, all of this, for me personally, like, as I'm sort of pulling back the layers on this, and the double salary scale, like, that I just mentioned, is absolutely commonplace. Like, it is as commonplace, and in the big NGOs, the disparity between what foreigners are paid and local people are paid is disgusting. And we had to look at that all through our own organisation and, you know, get rid of all of that. It's been hard. It's been hard and challenging, and it's a process. I'm not saying we're perfect, but, you know, where we're at today and the progress that we make in the communities is so much greater. Like, it's,
Same thing when it comes to women and men being paid for the same job. You know, women are paid less when it comes to a person who is black and a person who is white. It's just like it's the same problem.
Yeah.
Replicated through all of these different areas of society.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly beautiful to have people like you actively breaking that down and showing us how we can break it down moving forward.
Yeah, and that is what needs to happen. We need to dismantle all of these power structures, and
it is really brave of you, because it's a very difficult thing to be a white person and to be a part of that. It's really brave of you.
Yeah, it's very confronting to realize that you have been complicit in propping up like racist structures and systems. Like, it's a really difficult thing to face. But anti-racism work is inherently uncomfortable, and if it's not, like, you're not doing it right.
And that is why racism is sticking around, because it's a lot of white people that have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
And to actually look in the mirror and, it's a challenge.
Yeah. It really is. But I think worth it. And as soon as you stop, like, being so defensive about it, it's, you know, it's a worthwhile journey.
Well done.
Thanks. I mean, to be honest, like, actually, it's this sort of stuff is the most challenging thing for me, which, I mean, partly also because every single time I step forward to kind of talk about this stuff and raise awareness, I'm like, it's like this double-edged sword where I'm like simultaneously being the white savior again. And, you know, again, like, here I am telling Sinette's story for her instead. Like, it's this sort of double-edged sword where it's a really difficult thing to navigate. In the last few years, I honestly haven't done much media because I wasn't sure how to move forward.
Yeah.
Where it's not my voice. Honestly, it's not my voice that people need to hear. It's the voices of, you know, of the Cambodian people who, with this story. Like, for example, the film, we're not even telling it from my point of view.
Really?
Like, it's Sinette's story.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because she's the one with the lived experience.
Yeah.
Like, she's the victim. Like, I'm not the victim of this story. Like, it's her story that's interesting, and it's from her perspective that we can see things in a different way. And
but white people can relate to you.
That's right.
Because you have done the work and you're constantly breaking it down. You are someone that is really inspiring.
Yeah, and I can see that there's a role for me, but also it's not it's complicated.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, the filmmaking, where I sit in filmmaking, I'm all about human rights. That's the only reason I make films.
Right.
Yeah, and it's hard.
Yeah, like the other day I did do an interview, and the whole reason I was thinking like, great, I get to talk about the white savior thing, and I've like not really done that in like public before. And then so did the whole interview, and then they literally cut out everything that I talked about the white savior thing, and it just ended up being this sort of fluff piece about COVID. And again, so I then become, everyone who writes in is like, I just become the white savior and like become the exact thing, promoting the exact thing that I'm like trying to
Was
combat.
this a 4-minute thing on a 7 p.m.? Yeah, I watched it.
Right, I didn't. But
yeah, but that is, I mean, I guess it's just still evident that there is so much work to do. And
and that people are kind of not ready, like, on primetime television to hear words like white supremacy. Like, it's just too confronting.
Or even white saviour.
Yeah.
Because again, it forces us to look at ourselves.
Yeah.
I was speaking to Uncle Shane Phillips, amazing Redfern leader, and I asked him, what is your one dream for Australia? And his response was, change the media.
Right.
Change the lens in which they look at Aboriginal Australia.
Yeah.
Because there's always that negative connotation coming from white way's best way.
Yeah. I would definitely second that, because it is the hero worshipping of the white savior that has created this problem across the developing world. Like it's after I did that Australian story and being catapulted to this like hero in Australia for starting an orphanage. That's
winning Australian of the year.
Yeah, and you look at the Angelina Jolie effect. Like, you could probably track the rise of orphanages to her adoption of Maddox from Battambang, and honestly, he has family, that kid. And, you even have to look at the Oscars a couple of years back with Green Book winning Best Oscar, and that is a white savior film. Like, the protagonist of that story should have been Donald Shirley, this virtuosic piano player, like, spoke how many 5 languages or something, and how many doctorates he had. And the story was told through the lens of his white driver.
Yeah.
Like, and he was like a secondary role in his own film. And that's just recent. Like, the white savior narrative and the way that the media like applauds and celebrates the white savior is really the crux of the problem, I think.
Yeah.
As I said before, a lot of the people that are still running orphanages are doing it because of the reputational gain, and people are donating to those people because of their reputation. I mean, you just have to look at like Mother Teresa. I think everybody knows who Mother Teresa is. I don't think most people know what she did and what work she did. And, honestly, she set up and ran many, many orphanages, about 30 orphanages. And she did that because she was the most outspoken opponent of abortion and contraception, and so believed that babies should be born and put into orphanages. And I don't think most people, know that about her work. Well, she's, been heralded as a saint. The work that she's done certainly doesn't align with my morals and values and ethics. So I think, we really need to move away from like how the media looks at the who of charity and not actually what and the work that's being done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really tough spot. Even, as a filmmaker, it forces me to next film, how am I going to approach this?
Right.
For the greater good, how do I do this without perpetuating some, most Western ideas are wrong.
Yeah.
But how do I do that? So, I mean, it's really challenging, and I feel that I'm right in it as well.
Yeah, I think, and just acknowledging the challenge and acknowledging the wrestle is a step anyway in the right direction of working out how to navigate through. But I think really it comes down to like the international development sector is a neo-colonial sector built on a foundation of racial oppression. So even though within CCT we're doing everything we can to make things right and, getting rid of the expat senior leadership team and one salary scale for all people, etc. Even though we're doing that, we still operate within a industry that is inherently racist and colonial in so many ways.
Yeah.
So in that way, you can never be like perfect until the whole system is broken down and rebuilt again. It's not about being perfect at this point in time, but like, I guess fighting for things to change.
And keep learning and being open to it.
Yeah.
And it's generations.
Yeah.
Like, this is not quick fix. Okay, 10 years we'll be right. We got it. We've read our books and, we're all good. Let's go. It's like a constant, continual evolution.
Yeah.
And it's also going to be a fight because you're going to have to push back.
Yeah.
Because the Donald Trumps of the world.
There's always the backlash that comes with every big, social justice movement.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't envision us not needing money anytime soon. I mean, the dream is for us all to be living in a way that is sustainable in every way, and for money to be a secondary thing or not even a thing.
I mean, and that is, in all honesty, when you're looking at addressing issues of inequality globally and how people can help, like it still is really necessary to like bridge that divide between the haves and the have-nots and, the gross inequality across the world of wealth. So, in terms of Westerners giving generously to people who have less is a good thing to do. It just needs to be done in ways that we are providing them the
tools,
resources and tools for communities and people to solve their own problems, like not stepping in and West is best and do it our way and, just take this child protection system here in Australia, which is, pretty broken, and importing it into a country like Cambodia. Like, let Cambodia do it in a way that makes sense to them. There's all of the knowledge and skills and wisdom to solve their own problems. And so just, taking off that paternalistic hat and using what we've got to be the fuel and the fire behind the social change that can happen in these communities. And
I think not being afraid to be the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's a big part of dismantling white privilege and these systemic power structures.
Yeah. Well, you're amazing.
No, you're amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Let's do it again sometime.
Yes. Thank you to the courageous and brilliant Tara Winkler for joining me on today's episode of The Loving Podcast. To support Tara's work at the Cambodian Children's Trust, please head over to thelovingpodcast.com and click on Tara. For more information on today's show, you can head to the show notes, and you can also check out our socials at The Loving Podcast on Insta and Facebook. We'll catch you next week when we talk to the Honourable Linda Burney about her rise to become one of the most powerful forces of Indigenous governance in Australia. Did you have an idea? I mean, I know you said that you're very conscious of what was fair and what was not, and did you feel back then that you were going to make change? Like...
Oh, gosh.
No?
No. When you grow up in a small town, your expectations are not huge. I wouldn't have even known what a politician was.
That was obviously a time when the stolen generation was happening.
I wasn't conscious of that.
You weren't?
No, I wasn't. But could have easily been part of it in some ways.
See you next week. Big love to you all.
The Loving Podcast is a One Love Films original podcast. It is recorded at Forbes Street Studios, Woolloomooloo by Charlotte Rushkoot and Nicholas Rouse. Our editors are Zoltan Fetcho and Jenna Chanel Hayes. Our music is composed by Jenna Pratt and guitarist Joshua Gonzalez. Podcast photography and cover art is created by Sarah Fountain. Our behind-the-scenes photographers/videographers are Danielle Mazzucci, Barnaby Downs, Paul King, and Ryan Andrew Lee. Our podcast imagery is created at Innkeeper Studios. I am your narrator, Victoria Jane Hind, and our producer is Jenna Chanel Hayes.